Hello, my friends. This is going to be the start of a new series I'm going to be experimenting with, I think. Um, and it's not going to be just about Limbus Company, because, there's a little bit of a content drought right now, but I don't want to stop making content, because making content's pretty fun. So I was thinking to myself, like, you know,
이
oh,
피로먹을
Ryoshi,
기분은
shut the
언제
heck up, man.
끝나지?
But yeah, I
뭐
was thinking
그런
to myself,
생각은
um, you know, I do like making videos, and making videos is the easiest way to grow your channel. Streaming doesn't really grow your channel that much, but like, there's a content drought in Limbus, so I'm gonna be starting a new series. Uh, and I reflected on myself. I'm like, well, we can't really make Limbus videos because there's not much to really make at the moment. So, I think my strongest, I'm at my strongest personally when I'm teaching, I think. So, this is what this new series is going to be. I don't know what it's going to be called yet. It might be like the strategy behind strategy or something. Like, I don't know, strategy of strategy games. But, yeah. So in this episode, we're just experimenting to see if people are interested in this kind of stuff. But yeah, I'm just going to try to maybe teach you, my loyal viewers and my fellow gamers, strategy enthusiasts, you know, the basics on different concepts that I use in strategy games to hopefully help you guys get better at strategy games, just in general, not specifically at Limbus Company. And the first thing I'm going to go over in this video is pathing. What do you mean by pathing? Well, what I mean by pathing is like in strategy games and roguelike games, usually. Um, there are two different types of maps, right? Uh, there's one type of map that's used in Limbus, and I call it the node style map, right? The node map. You see it in Mirror Dungeon and stuff, right? Where you basically, in order to move around, you just click on nodes. You click on nodes and you move in the nodes and stuff, right? Very simple. And then these nodes are randomly generated and whatever. Usually the game will allow you to see what's coming up, but sometimes you can't, like in this case in particular, you can't see what's coming up. But that's the general idea. You see this in many games. I believe the first game to really popularize it was like Slay the Spire, but it's been around since before Slay the Spire. But it's this type of map style. The other one is like the dungeon style map. It's the one that you see in like Binding of Isaac, Enter the Gungeon, Hades, like those types. Crypt of the Necrodancer to a certain extent, right? Where you're kind of moving between rooms on a map, right? Uh, and that's a little bit less predictable unless you're very experienced with those games. So I'm going to be focusing on the node style maps when I mean pathing, right? Because that's a very intimidating thing for a lot of people, right? So we're going to be talking about pathing. There's a couple of principles behind pathing that I like to stick to. When you see people playing these kinds of games like Slay the Spire and stuff, and there's a ton of different options. We're going to use Slay the Spire as an example later in the video, but Limbus Company has, I'm sure all of my viewers are very familiar with how this kind of works, and it's very simple. This is like the simplest version in any game, right? Uh, so this is going to be the first example we use. But when you see people deciding on where to path, there's many different things that can kind of go into it, depending on the game. But there are general rules as well. The first thing you want to think about is, when there's a lot of different options, you want to kind of make it simpler for yourself, because you might see like the top level gamers, they look at an entire Slay the Spire map or something and they're like, yeah, I know exactly where I want to go, but they don't really tell you why they're doing it, right? Or what their method is to figure out where they want to go, right? So this is going to be the simple example, and then we're going to move on to different games like Slay the Spire to kind of show these principles off, right? But the general rule is you want to give yourself options. Give yourself as many options as possible, right? So you can see, like, for example, we'll just talk in Limbus terms because I'm sure all of my viewers know generally how to play Mirror Dungeon, right? We have two slash nodes here and then a blunt node, right? Usually the strategy is to avoid blunt nodes, of course, but we see that we have to think further into the future a little bit here, and say to ourselves, well, you know, we have a blunt node here, and there's two paths coming off of it, right? That gives us two options over here if we were to take the blunt node, versus, you know, we have these two slash nodes, which are better to take than a blunt node generally, because the encounters are pretty significantly easier on average, right? And they only have one path each, right? So this is your decision as a player. I tend to stay away from blunt nodes whenever possible, so I'm going to say, well, I'm going to sacrifice the fact that we have two potential options here for the safer nodes, which have one option, right? The thing about that is, um, you know, it is a risk you should be willing to take, but now you have to ask yourself, well, which slash node do I want to take? Well, a less enlightened player might say, well, these two are basically the same, right? They're functionally the same. They're both slash nodes. They both have one path coming off of them. They're the same, right? I will give you about 5 seconds to guess which one is technically the better choice. Because there is actually a quote-unquote correct choice. I'll give you like 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so the correct choice technically in this situation is actually the top slash node, and I'll tell you why in a second. But again, you might think to yourself, oh, these two are exactly the same. They literally are both the same encounter and whatever, and they both have one path, so it doesn't matter which one I take. Well, it actually does, because again, if you're trying to give yourself the most options possible, you can see that these two paths lead to a node here. These two paths lead to a node here, right? Now, what are the possible paths that these nodes could lead to, right? Well, what we'll say, hypothetically speaking, the bottom node can only lead into another bottom node or into a middle node, right? Whereas the middle node can lead into either a bottom node, a middle node, or a top node. Just in theory, okay? Because I'm pretty sure you can't cross these. So my hunch is that what's going to happen, and this is just, again, an educated guess. I don't know how the map generation works, but this is like what we're potentially looking at here, right? Something like this. We'll say in theory, of course. Again, this is all just speculation. This is not pre-recorded or anything. I literally don't know what's next. But just in general, sticking to the middle of the map is going to be safer than going and sticking on the edge. Because if we get a situation like this, where we've outlined here, you only have one choice here, right? And you might get streamlined into something bad. And this is kind of, again, this is a principle that a lot of strategy game players use, as far as I can tell. I mean, this is what I use in order to do my pathing, right? You want to leave as many options as possible, right? So you don't have to think about every single individual node. And again, we're going to use other games to make this a little more clear, because again, this is a very, very simple example. But the general principle is you want to give yourself as many options as possible. Now I'm going to do this top node off camera, just really quickly. I'll pause the recording, do the top node, and then we'll get to see the next nodes, right? And we will see if I'm right or not. I'm gonna keep the recording. Whether or not we're rewarded is, its own thing. But generally, you want to try and stick towards the middle because it gives you the highest chance that you have the most options. So I'm going to hit you again once we clear this thing out. Alright, so we're just coming off of the fight here, and we will see whether or not I am rewarded for my efforts. And you can see that I'm actually rewarded. You can see that I actually did end up choosing the correct node. because when we stick to the middle here, and we're going to move into this node, because again, it's the only valid choice. We only had one option. Whichever way we went, we only had one option, right? But you can see that I'm actually rewarded for picking the quote-unquote correct node, because you go over here, once I enter this node, I get two choices to come off of here, right? Versus if I were to take the bottom node, even though, again, they're both the exact same encounter, right? They're both the exact same encounter, but if I would go on the bottom node, I actually would have been pinholed into whatever this node is, and this could have been a bad node, right? But if I go into the middle node, I actually get two choices, and if this ends up being a bad node, then I can actually divert to a good node, right? And again, even though these two encounters are the exact same, right? This one is actually quote unquote, like, I'll say higher quality of a node, because you can actually use it to divert onto either choice, right? And that's what this is kind of a really good example of this principle, right? So, now that we kind of understand this concept, right? Maybe I'll do this encounter too, just to see whether or not that ends up paying off. But you can already see that this is already paying off by giving us more choices, right? Just this small little optimization. And this is just something that comes naturally over time. You want to generally pick choices that will give you the most paths, right? Because those will give you more options. And more options is always better. So again, I will pause the recording, do the fight, and then I'll hit you back when we finish. Alright, so we just finished that second encounter, and it looks like we have two question mark encounters, right? So technically, there is not much difference here because we can't know what's in these. So again, just to make sure just to understand, just making sure we're touching base, we understand the principle. These two encounters are, again, exactly identical, right? So, we want to pick the one that will give us more options. We see this one is just strictly superior than this one, because these two both lead to the same node down here, right? Whereas this one, optionally, also allows us to go to the node up here. So, if we were to pick this one, obviously, we would only have this choice. But, if we pick this one, we can still go to this choice, right? We can still take this node if we want, but if we don't want that node, we have the option to dip out of it, right? So, we'll see what happens here. Helterfly. We're going to turn around because this Abno sucks. And let's see if we care. We don't end up caring. Which is, a little bit of a bad example. But you understand that there is a significant, there is a significant benefit from paying attention to this stuff generally, like on a wider scale. Like, what if this was another slash encounter and this was a blunt encounter, right? We would then get rewarded for picking this one, even though, these two encounters are quote-unquote the same, right? So we're going to swap over to Slay the Spire, and we're going to slowly level up. Again, this is a very simple example. The pathing in this game is extremely simple, but let's go into a game where things might not be quite so easy, and the decision-making for pathing might be a little bit harder, right? So I'll catch you on the flip side there. Alright, we are back in Slay the Spire. I just opened up a new run, going in completely blind, of course, and we're just going to take a look at the map, right? We're just going to take a look at the map and see what we've got going on here. So, we can already tell, I'm sure your gamer instinct will immediately be ringing alarm bells on, for example, this left path, right? A lot of people probably would instinctively already know, yeah, the left path is pretty troll. It looks really funny too, because there's only one you don't have any choices if you take left path, right? So there are very, very few situations where you would ever want to go on a singular linear path like this, and I'm sure you guys already knew that. So that's a very, very obvious example. But let's say, like, I'm playing Slay the Spire, right? In Slay the Spire, in case you don't know, early floor, let's just make it simple. I want to hit an elite, right? We want to hit a few elites. Elites are the good encounters in this game, right? So, if I take left path, I only get one elite up here, so that's a no-no. If I take this right cluster down this right tree, I can hit potentially 2 elites. I get 1 elite here, and then I get 1 here or here, right? So, let's say I want to hit elites, just to, again, keep it simple for people who don't necessarily know Slay the Spire. Elites are good, especially early on. We want to hit them. So, we might be thinking to ourselves, very similar situation as before. We might be thinking to ourselves, hey, I want to give myself options on whether or not I can take elites, right? Because you'll see when people play Slay the Spire, you'll imagine that the player, especially if they're really good, you'll imagine that the player is going to look at every single node, like every single potential conceivable path, and then find out the most optimal path, like every single time. They'll sit there staring at the map for 10 minutes to find out the optimal path. I'm gonna tell you right now, that's usually not what they're doing. Again, I'm not speaking for every single person, obviously, but that is usually not what they're doing, and that's certainly not what I do. Sometimes I might if the run is very difficult, but generally speaking, I make things very, very simple for myself, and that's by, again, identifying whether or not I can give myself choices in the future, right? So, if we're assuming that both of these trees, we'll say, both of these trees meet up here. So, technically, neither of these choices end up mattering, right? It's the same thing with the Limbus example, right? Technically, both of these trees meet at the same point, so where we start doesn't quote-unquote matter, right? But I see this place only has one option, right? This place only has one option. This place has 2 options, if I so choose, right? So, obviously, this part would be the strictly better option, in my opinion, of course. It would be the strictly better option, because these 2 paths, if you look at them, these 2 paths are technically 100% identical. They both have 1 combat, and they both have 1 question mark, and then they both meet up with this question mark, these 2 question marks up here, right? So, if I were to take left, it's literally just a better version of this, right? Because I can choose to go the exact same path as this, or I could take more combats if I so choose, right? So going left would be the optimal choice. Then we kind of move up, and we see we have multiple options. Well, do we actually have multiple options? The left path is not really that crazy, because I want to hit an elite. I want to hit an elite here, right? And the left path could allow me to hit an elite, of course. It would allow me to hit an elite. But when you think about it this way, this elite up here, if I want to go for the elite, and then this combat ends up being very hard, right? I go into the elite, I could lose my run, and there's no way for me to get out of the elite, right? We'll just say, hypothetically speaking, of course. So this actually is not really conducive to our principle of giving ourselves as many options as possible. Now, if you look down at this elite, we actually do have a situation where we could give ourselves the option, right? We could go for this campfire, perhaps, or this question mark, right? Then we move on to this question mark here from either direction, and we'll assume that we can, we go here, what if there's a combat here, whatever. If there's a combat there, and I get seriously effed up, right? Like, my HP is super low, I have the option to either take the elite or dip out of the elite, right? I'm giving myself the opportunity to leave that encounter if I would need to. I seriously would not like to, but I want to give myself the option to leave it, just to leave the option open, right? You know what I mean? And that is always going to be a better option than going for this elite and endangering yourself potentially on this encounter and then being pigeonholed into taking the elite, right? And you can see that there is no conceivable path where you can take both elites. Just so you know, there are no conceivable paths, obviously, to take both elites, because from here, it's just a linear straight shot up here where both of these paths conjoin with each other, right? So you can't take both elites, so you have to pick whichever one you want, in this example, of course, right? You have to pick whichever elite you want, And I would say, personally, just to make it simple for myself, you want to give yourself the option to dip out of the elite just in case. You never know what could happen, right? You never know what could happen. Uh, there is, of course, the, once we get into, like, Slay the Spire specific jargon, like, it's better to take more encounters early because you can get more money and stuff. Like, okay, you can start thinking about it once you get familiar with the game. But just as a general principle for all of these types of node-based games, right? That's definitely going to be your best shot, is giving as many options as possible for yourself. And again, with this elite, right? We want to give ourselves the option. Thankfully, this time, the game forces us to have options here, because both of our choices can either be into the elite or into another path. So we don't have to worry about it as much, right? So just in the span of, what was that, like 5 minutes, considering I'm also trying to teach you, it's a little bit different. But, um, you know, just in that short span of time, we figured out where the quote-unquote optimal path is, and we didn't even have to do that much heavy lifting, right? We're just gonna go, like, up here, for example, and then go straight up to the elite up there, you know? And then we're gonna go, let's say, hypothetically, we're going to take the elite, we're going to go rest up at the campfire, take, like, 2 question marks or something, or take the combat, and then hit the other elite up here, right? And this is basically what we do. I say we as in, like, people who played a lot of these kinds of strategy games. This is basically what we do. We simplify the map. Don't have to worry about any of the other, like, random ass nodes. We want to focus on which nodes we want, and then give ourselves options to take the node or go a different path or stuff like that, right? So you don't have to hyper focus on every single node. You just want to say, like, okay, I want elites. Or, like, let's say I want campfires, right? Well, if I want campfires, then I can do a similar thing. Like, I want a campfire, but let's say I don't need to rest, then I'll give myself the option to take the elite instead, right? It's kind of simple as that. It really is as simple as that. You want to like simplify the situation as much as possible for yourself. Just focus on, like, hey, I want to take these, uh, give myself as many options as possible. Just leave your options open. This will just make your gameplay a lot more consistent in general, and it takes a lot of mental stress off of your brain, because it keeps you from getting overwhelmed when you're looking at this. A lot of this, I find, especially for people who are less accustomed to pathing in strategy games, a lot of this is very overwhelming for people, right? And a lot of it is actually the illusion of choice. They give you a lot of lines. They give you a lot of lines to go around and whatever, right? But a lot of it is the illusion of choice. And I'm going to go into a third game here to show you, to demonstrate that illusion of choice, where it looks like you have a lot of options. But let's say if I take this elite, right? If we look at it a little more closely, we actually, once we take the elite, we have no options until we get to this question mark up here, right? In which case we start getting a few more options, once we get up here, right? But it is the illusion of choice. Once you're down a path, right? Once you're down a path, you pick, like, this path, right? Like, none of these end up mattering, right? None of these end up mattering. So you don't have to worry about, as soon as you're set on a path, you don't have to think about any of the other ones. And that's what we want to do, right? We want to eliminate as many nodes as possible that we don't care about, so that we simplify the situation for ourselves, right? So no matter what happens, right? For example, here, no matter what happens, let's say we're never taking this node, right? We're always taking a campfire or a question mark, and then we're going into here, and there's no choice here because both of these lead to the same node, and we're taking the elite or the campfire, right? Depending on what happens to us previously in the run. If we take the elite, there's no option. And again, our desire is to take the elite. So we want to take the elite, there's literally no option. And then up here, the difference here is negligible. It's either an encounter or a question mark, right? And we're hopefully going to take the elite here and then move on to the boss, right? So we're just making it very simple for ourselves. by removing the nodes that we know we don't care about, right? We know we don't care about these. So there's only really like two actual decisions we have to make, right? There's only like two actual decisions we have to make in this entire floor. There's only like two decisions. So eliminating the illusion of choice helps you, you know, think through this stuff a lot faster, and makes it a lot simpler for you to make decisions, right? And this stuff happens as soon as you start getting used to doing this. This will happen naturally, right? This will happen naturally. Literally within seconds, I can identify, which path is instantly going to be the best one, just because I have a lot of practice doing this kind of stuff, because I've seen a lot of these node maps over the course of my life just playing these games. But yeah, so we're going to move on to a third example of a game that has a similar map style to this. And we're going to, again, stress the... this time we're going to elaborate on the concept of the illusion of choice, right? So I will pause the recording again, and I'll cut to you back when we open up that third game. Hello and welcome to Darkest Dungeon 2. This is going to be the last example for this video, but again, we are going to be talking about pathing. This game features a very similar map system to Slay the Spire and whatnot, the node-based mapping system. I've already gone through the formalities of, picking the run and whatever, so that we can hop right in. We don't have to go through the intro or anything. But yeah. So I've simplified this example just for you. I've taken a attachment, a pet that eliminates all of the locations and routes, right? So everything we have is question marks. This makes this very simple if you're not familiar with this game, because you don't have to get overwhelmed with icons and whatever. But we're just going to be looking at the map. Now, we see up here that there is a watchtower, right? The watchtower, you see reward scouting. What that means is that it basically reveals the entire map to you once you hit the watchtower. Once you hit the watchtower, it will reveal the entire map. Definitely a very powerful ability, actually. The watchtower is a very, very valuable resource in this game, because information is a very powerful resource. So I can't switch to pen without it scrolling down. Oh well. But yeah. So the watchtower is extremely strong, because pathing in this game is actually very, very it's pretty I don't know how to describe it. It's pretty punishing if you path incorrectly, we'll say, right? We can see some of these paths already, right? We can already see some of these paths. No matter what, I'm going to be going to the right, because if I go center or I go left, I'm forced to go over here, right? Whereas if I go over to the rightmost path, I actually get 3 whole choices, right? Versus getting pigeonholed into the left node over here, right? If I wanted to, I could still go to the left node, but I would rather not. Sometimes we'll see, obviously. But besides that, just based on principles, and again, you can see it coming up here as well. If I were to take this path or this path, right? If I were to take either of those, you can see both of these paths actually pigeonhole me again into going to the watchtower, right? Versus if I bank to the right again, I actually get 2 choices. So that's actually pretty good. And again, up here, we get another choice. If we were to stay on the right, we get another choice versus getting pigeonholed up here. So it looks like, to me, the rightmost path is the safest one. Even though we don't know what any of these nodes are. These don't get revealed until we reach them. So we actually don't know what any of these nodes are. The only way you would know is by hitting the watchtower. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, the watchtower looks really solid. It allows you to make educated decisions rather than the illusion of choice, because technically you're not choosing anything. If you're just going into 2 question marks, like, it could be anything. So you're not really choosing anything, right? So, technically, when you put it that way, the watchtower looks pretty appealing in that sense, right? Uh, let's try and maybe I can bring the pen closer so that it doesn't scroll down while I draw, but no promises. But yeah, so, the watchtower looks pretty appealing. Think about it this way, though. And this is where I talk about the illusion of choice, right? We go up to the watchtower. Let's say we take any of these up to the watchtower, right? What do we do once we get the watchtower? Well, we get to scout everything, right? We get to know what all these nodes are. Again, if you don't play this game, you don't have to worry about what the nodes are. But I'm just saying, like, in theory, you do get to know what all the nodes are, which is a pretty good effect. The thing is, if you look a little more closely, you will soon realize that the watchtower is pigeonholed into just the hard left path. You actually, once I hit the watchtower, I'm actually not allowed to choose where I go anyway, right? I'm not allowed to actually pick my path once I hit the watchtower because there's only one path I'm allowed to take once I get there. So even though the watchtower is a powerful effect and it reveals every node on the map, I'm not actually getting any information that will be useful for my decision making and my pathing, right? I will not be actually gaining any useful information from this in a broad sense because even though I do get information, I'm still not allowed to choose where I go anyway. So they might as well be random nodes. At that point, they might as well just be random nodes because if I'm not allowed to choose, then it doesn't matter what they are. It's just kind of an accepted situation. You just have to accept that you're going into random nodes. The only difference is, oh, I can actually kind of see where I'm going a little bit before I get there versus like, oh well, there's technically a quote unquote surprise factor, right? So if anything, I would want to avoid the watchtower because it, again, even though it does provide valuable information, I can't actually act on the information, right? It's not actionable information. I can't make decisions about the watchtower because once I hit it, I can't actually choose to go which way or whatever way because all of the nodes are already predetermined for me. Even though they are revealed, it doesn't actually increase or decrease my gameplay in any meaningful way, right? So personally, if it were me, I would work towards the other node that I know, which is the lair. You don't need to know what the lair is. It's kind of like a harder dungeon. It's a harder dungeon, but it's kind of like an elite in Slay the Spire, I'll say. So what I want to do is maybe bank right, go into the middle because the middle, this is the only meaningful choice I have, right? Because again, the choices between two question marks is meaningless because they're both random. So there's no choice here, right? The choice between the two question marks is meaningless. So if you wanted to pick between two question marks, again, just pick the one that gives you the most options, right? Two unknowns, and then I actually get a choice here. This is the only choice in the entire map that I get. Uh, and that choice is whether I want to hit the lair or not. So I want to put myself in a position where I actually do get a choice. Even though I have no scouting, right? I actually do get one choice. And I want to put myself in the position where I get to choose, right? Because again, it's all about giving yourself the opportunity to take or to give up some of these resources, right? Whether or not, maybe my party's banged up and I can't go through the elite dungeon, right? I can dip out of it, if I so choose, right? Or if I'm feeling confident, by the time I get there, my party's in good shape. I could just go for the lair, and then the rest is, predetermined for me. So even in a map that's completely dark, right? And there's an opportunity to light up the map, I'm not necessarily going to take it because it doesn't actually end up doing anything, right? Versus I'd rather stay in the middle here. Again, just kind of trying to stay in the middle because generally in games, the middle will give you the most options. You see it in Limbus in that previous example, and so too with Slay the Spire. We went with the middle path as well. But yeah, in this game, in this situation, I'm going to stick into the middle here and just give myself that one choice, because it's better than having no choices if I were to bank all the way on the right and then having the choice between two question marks, which again is basically a non-choice, right? So I want to give myself the choice between the lair and the unknown, right? And that's what I mean by the illusion of choice. You're like, wow, dude, the watchtower, this gives me information. And information means more educated decisions, right? Because that's what it comes down to. You want to make the most educated decisions. But once you hit the watchtower, if you just think about it a little bit more, there are no decisions to be made. So you're actually, by taking the choice that you think gives you the most educated decisions, you actually rob yourself of all of your potential decisions, right? Because once we decide to go to this node, all of the other nodes are going to be blocked off. I mean, I can move the pen over here, but I'm sure you understand by now. You understand the concept. But yeah, all of the other nodes are going to get blocked off once you hit this watchtower, right? So you're not even giving yourself the chance to hit the lair. And then obviously these nodes are all irrelevant, of course, and this too, right? So you're not even giving yourself the chance to hit the lair. Even if you have zero intention of taking it, right? Even if you have no intention of taking it, you want to give yourself the chance to take it, just in case. It's good practice, because there are some runs where I'm like, yeah, there's no way in hell I'm going to be able to get the lair. Or in Slay the Spire, like, there's no way in hell I'm going to be able to fight this elite, right? But, like, if it's the choice between either the lair or a question mark, uh, I want to give myself like, it's just good practice to give yourself the option, even if you have zero intention of taking it, because this node on the left is just higher quality than this node on the right, simply by the virtue of it having a choice, right? That gives it some sort of inherent value, because again, the decision between two question marks is the illusion of choice. You don't actually get a choice. Uh, the choice is whichever path you want to take, right? And I want to give myself the choice to take whichever path over here. So that's gonna do it for this video. Let me know if you want more of this stuff, of course, uh, because I like talking about this stuff. Again, these are some very simple concepts, but I don't think a lot of people talk about it, and the explanation behind the decision making is something that a lot of people are missing, I feel like, where you can look up like Ascension 20 runs of Slay the Spire, right? And you can be like, wow, this guy's really good. But my goal with like this series, I say series in quotes because I don't know if it's actually going to become a series or not. But the goal behind this series is to help you understand some of the decision making that goes on behind the scenes, because a lot of the time, and again, by we I mean like players who are, I don't want to, gas myself up too much here, but players who are good at strategy games, we kind of think about this like automatically, because it's just kind of hardwired. The decision making process for me happens in like less than a second. Like, I can identify paths in like less than a second, right? And it might seem intimidating for people who don't understand, like, that kind of, they don't have that habit built, I'll say. They don't have the habit of looking for giving themselves out options and whatever. But yeah, that stuff kind of comes with practice. And the thing is, you won't know really to practice it until someone tells you. No one told me, but I just played a lot of games, but some people do not have the time to play a lot of games. So, hopefully this is at least entertaining. I hope that this at least helps you a little bit, if nothing else. I hope it's entertaining, of course. But yeah, let me know if you want this to be a series. I have a couple of other concepts off the top of my head that I would be interested in making videos in. But, I just wanted to see, feel out whether or not people are interested in this kind of stuff, where it's like, not specifically Limbus Company oriented, but just strategy games in general, right? Because I feel like that's definitely my strongest area. So, yeah, let me know. But until next time, peace. Catch you later.